Okay. I just want to start with the fact that, I don't know, we were talking before we started. It's been 5 years. 5 years already since what happened across the street happened. And that, just your thoughts immediately, whoever wants to go first. We'll start with you, Senator Kimpson. You and I talked that next morning. Have you been able to get your head around the fact where we are here 5 years later?
It's been a long 5 years.
You think it's been long?
Long in terms of the struggle for equality and justice. When you look in this neighborhood alone, there are numerous street names, Confederate monuments, largely symbolic, but psychologically devastating to people of color. It's been a long 5 years. When you look at Representative Gilliard's and my efforts and many others in leading gun reform in the state of South Carolina, to no avail, no meaningful progress. It's certainly been a long 5 years. When you look at the educational system, even yesterday, the racist comments by people within the Charleston County School District and the failing schools within our school district, a long 5 years. And so all of the material metrics that you measure the quality of life of the citizenry of Charleston County, we have not made any meaningful progress, let alone economically. If you look at King Street, there are very few merchants that reflect the diversity of the demographics of Charleston. Charleston County Airport, huge missed opportunity. It looks the merchants reflect cookie cutter USA as opposed to the great diversity of the city. No material African American contracts. I think it's incumbent on us to focus on economics and education as we turn the corner, in addition to police reform, as we turn the corner the next 5 years, and hopefully 5 years from now we can say we've made material gains in the true metrics that reflect a progressive society.
Representative Gilliard?
Well, definitely. I think given the fact that we're sitting here, even having this discussion, my first thoughts after hearing Senator Kimpson talk is the fact that we have digressed. Okay, just last night I was watching on my television a picture that reminded me of Walter Scott. And I saw the gentleman running, and an officer shooting that person in the back. We've got a long way to go. We got work to do. This is a serious situation in this country and in the world. I think the leadership from the top is amplifying the message, giving codes to a base of people, militia groups, hate groups. If you read the FBI report, it tells you that hate groups are on the rise here in this country, and especially here in the state of South Carolina. All this is intertwining as to unfold in this big storm that we're witnessing. And I remember being young guy back in the 60s. We had the Black Panthers, and I remember the FBI was infiltrating the Panthers, groups all over the country. Okay, I would like to see now that the feds go after these groups. Okay, just like I used to tell people right down the street here, Dylan Roof. If you think for a minute that he operated by himself, then you're crazy. You say this brother, and I've read his story over and over and over. He lives in an area where one of these groups, that they have their operation is set up. Okay, These people that you see in law enforcement, the young Deliverers, they're getting their message through media by the means of computer websites. They're joining these organizations, these hate groups. Okay, some of these law officers I now know that belong to militia groups here. So this thing about, oh, we've got this big problem in law enforcement. Well, why for every given incident that one of these officers are involved in, why don't we do an extensive trail, research to find out if this man or woman belong to a militia group? And I can almost guarantee you, you'll be surprised. See, we're missing this opportunity. And if we don't understand that hate groups are on the rise, okay, just like I told the people in the General Assembly, okay, if we don't understand that these hate groups are on the rise, I've seen the research and read it, that tells me it does not take an Einstein to figure out if hate groups are on the rise, you're going to have hate crimes on the rise. And I'm quite sure that the professor or the senator would agree with that. It doesn't take Einstein to figure that out. So unless you infiltrate, okay, these groups, then and only then, you'll see a difference. We have to infiltrate these groups, okay, because now their members are resonating their philosophy all over this country by murdering young black men, okay? And people wonder why that I'm pushing for the hate crime, House Bill 3063, with the help of the senator over here, okay? We have to have a hate crime bill. We can't be one of 4 states that don't have a hate crime bill. But even by our history, by virtue of our history alone, we should have already had a hate crime bill. And also, this thing with John C. out there on John C. Calhoun statue, look, it's more than bringing down, it's more to it than bringing down a statue, okay? It's about rectifying the past, okay? You know that this guy, if you study his history, he owned slaves. His message to the Congress was that, and I'm quoting him now, that slavery is a positive good, okay? The mentality. How dare you put him 80 feet up in the air and say that that's remembering history? It's a difference between the word remember and reverence. When you raise somebody 80 feet up high, that's reverence, glorify, agree, okay? You're committing to his philosophy. And then to put the statue on one of the most busiest street in the city. And I'm quite sure John C. would agree with the senator just said from an economic stance. He would agree that there are less black businesses on King Street now than there ever were. John C. would agree. He would agree with the slaughter right down the street from where his statue now stands at Mother Emanuel Church. John C. would agree. John C. would agree that the fact that he probably want one of the most powerful Jewish memorial to be moved from him. He would agree. All you have to do is study his history. And you would, the first thing you would say, like many of us are now saying, especially the young people, bring it down. Okay, if you want to remember your history, put him in a museum. Okay, that's, you have to make the first move to show that you're serious. People are tired of holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and God wants us to show ourselves approved. In other words, we have work to do, okay? That's the part that people don't get. We planted the trees, we've been in sit-ins, walk-ins, shout-ins, sleep-ins. We're tired of that now. And thank God the younger people now, what you're witnessing before you in the world is the passing of the baton from us to the younger people, okay? We just have to show them how to. Don't lead them, let them go. But when they do something wrong, we have to insert that old saying that there is such thing as civil disobedience. So we digress. We have a long way to go. I'm very passionate about this. Like these gentlemen here, we've lived this, we've seen it, we've tasted, and we know what the problem is. As generation change, and I heard you say it early on, the mentality needs to change.
Yeah, you think it would age out.
You think it would age out. But you know why it won't? Because the problems that this generation was facing and still fighting persists. So that's what you're seeing today. Until we start moving forward with the problems of old to the problems that lasted to this day, then and only then you'll see a change.
Yeah, and of course, the problems don't age out either, because we can never separate the past from the present. They're organically related. And so the values that were deeply entrenched in the past, they're passed on. The younger generation is not completely separate from their parents and grandparents and so on. And so to a certain extent, those values continue to be passed on, and we have to find a way to kind of break that cycle. 5 years ago, this city was traumatized, as well as the whole nation, traumatized by the barbarity of what happened right down the street at Mother Emanuel. We couldn't believe it that such a heinous crime could happen in such a sacred place, a place of spirituality, and a place of great refuge and humanity. And we were really shaken by that. And we haven't fully recovered yet. It's an incident that has somewhat faded into the past into the background of our memories, but it's not gone, and I dare say it'll never be gone. And what subsequently happens is every time we have a George Floyd, an Arbery situation, what just happened, Rayshawn in Atlanta, we get re-traumatized. We get re-traumatized by those events. And there was a survey on race relations sponsored by the Charleston Forum, and a whole series of questions, and one of the things that really struck me as part of the results was that twice as often, African Americans concluded that discussions about race relations and improving race relations and bringing African Americans and whites together to have dialogue and so on, African Americans twice as frequently as whites argued that nothing would come of those discussions. And the reason for that is really because people have been out on the front lines for so long, for decades and decades and decades, and they're so frustrated by the lack of progress now. And that's a dangerous sign. It's a dangerous sign, but this is the only way forward. Discussion and interaction, bringing up these difficult issues and debating them and educating people just about the monuments and what they stand for and so on. I mean, what other country would have their military bases named after people who made war on the country itself and created a situation where the first American president in our history was ultimately assassinated by a representative of that? I mean, it is completely schizophrenic. It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
It's kind of like each one of these instances is a turning point, and instead of it being a turning point to change, it just keeps turning us back into a circle.
Well, I think that the past, you're certainly correct. It's been the definition of insanity. We keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. But like my colleagues here, I do believe this time is different.
Why?
Mainly because the young people, both black and white, didn't grow up in a generation where They're very used to the processes, the bureaucracy that we have grown accustomed to. They live in a real world ready
Right now.
to engage right now. And that's what you're seeing flashed across the television screens across the nation. They want change and they want it now. Now it's incumbent upon us to articulate and communicate a sense of permanency in how we take the pain and turn it into policy. And there is a process that we must follow. But all of us elected officials, including Representative Gilliard and I, we are duty bound to move as swiftly as possible because these are our constituents in which we represent. So yes, there's been a sea change of momentum and different expectations than we are normally accustomed to. And what we have to do is take that energy and to direct it into the halls of lawmaking and policy at a state and local level.
How do you keep the message up front when also on those TV screens you see buildings burning, rocks being thrown through windows, people running out of stores with arms full of stuff from their stores in the communities where these protests are going on that are ultimately left in ruins in some cases because you have the bad actors that come in to try and mess things up. And that hasn't changed. That's
the dawn of time.
Right.
You
So
know,
how do
since
you
the dawn
keep
of
the
time.
message
Yeah.
from getting drowned out? Because ultimately it does get drowned out, I think,
Mhm.
by that stuff.
You have to connect to your grassroots people. You have to connect to the young people. They have to connect, like the senator says, with people who've been out here on the forefront. And the younger people, you know, they have it right at their discretion where they can go say, all right, let's see who Senator Kimpson is. Right in front of their faces. And then they can determine at that point, well, we need to connect with Senator Kimpson. We need to connect with the professor over here. Because look at the bills that the senator has introduced. Look what the professor, the issues he's taken up through the years. Let's call them, and then let's sit down with them and have dialogue. And I'm telling you, we did the same. It's almost like deja vu to me, because we did the same thing back when I was young, back in the 60s. You know, the SCLC movement, you know, Rainbow Push, Jesse Jackson, you know, and the national, you know, NAACP back then, okay? You know, you connect with leaders who are genuine, who are real. And I always tell people, like Senator Kimpson, when it comes to us as elected officials, don't judge us by what we say. You judge us by things we have done and things that we're presently doing. You say, that's the only way you're gonna judge an elected official.
Yeah.
And you have that at your discretion. You know, you could Google any of our names, just like I had a group call me last week. Mr. Gilliard, we see here that you was trying to introduce the hate crime bill, you know, and we saw where you introduced the body camera, which is now law, you know, thanks with the help of the Senate and many others in Columbia. You know, that's now law. But the young lady said, but I want to ask you something. When you introduced the body camera bill, I saw where they were calling you crazy, you know, all kind of names. I said, well, that comes with the position. I said, you got to remember that bill is now law. She said, yeah, Mr. Gilliard, but that didn't stop no killings. I said, well, you need to read a little further. Because when I introduced the body camera bill, my first quote was, this is not a solve-all. It's just bringing you, the world, in as participants. I guess, as a lawyer would say, witnesses. In other words, you're cutting through the lies, you're cutting through the chase, because you got to remember, before the body camera, if Gilliard was a drug dealer or whatever, and Gilliard got killed by a law officer, you would only see on the TV screen, Gilliard got charged with drugs here, Gilliard got drugs there, and boom, now you have a false image of a man who might have been murdered
They can still
by
keep that
police
from us,
officer
can't they?
unjustly. thanks to technology, when you said take it from us. tell
No,
me
I'm saying
what
they can keep it from me if I ask them for it, can't they?
What's that?
There were some, look, politics is the art of compromise. And is it a perfect bill as
Yeah.
Representative Gilliard envisioned when he first started discussing it? No. We have several gaps. But to address your question, any victim can get access to the footage, their counsel and their family, and they can certainly give it to the
Gotcha.
press.
Mhm.
During the discussion, many local governments were concerned that we would have a broad universe, press included, of people requesting videotape.
Mhm.
And so they would have to pull staff from permitting, staff from street names to accommodate requests, sometimes in their view not legitimate requests, but requests by outlets who didn't have a genuine concern for news. And so FOIA was accepted. There was an exception made to our current FOIA law, which limited the universe. The other main gap of the body camera law, it's not fully funded by the General Assembly. We get, Gilliard and I have to work on that.
Mhm.
And there's no requirement for the camera to be on, which is a gaping hole. And so it is still, we're still better off for it. And that's what you're witnessing across
Right.
The television
world,
screens
yeah.
across the nation.
Mhm.
Prior to body cameras, it was the officer's narrative
Thank you.
that was the gold standard for what happened.
That's right.
And now, if the body camera is on, and everyone knows that video is the
Mhm.
best evidence, it can contradict.
That's
You
right.
know, whether they get a conviction or not, there's a different standard for that. But the world is now seeing the evidence displayed almost real time. And so body cameras have been good for this nation, but we need to do a better job at tweaking
Very
the
good.
statutes such that it accomplishes the goal.
I'm sensing positivity
Yes.
from you guys.
Yes.
Because
yeah.
we're doing what we call
Like-
hard talk, real talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
the spirit that, you know, if he's being honest, I'm being honest, the professor's being honest, we're real because we want change for the positive.
And you think it can
That's
happen.
right.
We
Yes,
know
yes,
it can
yes.
happen.
And
Wait,
go
ahead, Professor.
And going back to what the senator mentioned about the body camera, you know, one of the great successes or means by which the civil rights movement was able to succeed was television.
Bingo.
Television. Because the marches, which elicited so much white hostility, aggression,
Mhm.
criminality, excuse me, was all captured on TV
Mhm.
and broadcast around the world. So there could be no denial at that point and afterwards. And the stories that African Americans had been telling for decades and decades and decades about their abuse by white supremacists, by the Klan, by the police, and so on and so forth, they were all captured and transmitted around the world. And so we're now at a similar moment with the great access that people have to cell phones,
Right.
and they're capturing this kind of abuse. And that is why we're seeing so many people cross the racial lines and come together in a progressive cause.
Is that what gives you the hope
Absolutely, absolutely.
that this is
absolutely.
different?
Yes, that it is, and that it is multiracial, multicultural, it is international in scope, and you know, that is something that American leadership in general, I'm not sure about the present leadership that we have at the top, but in general, American presidents have been very concerned about, and Congress has been very concerned about the image of America abroad. And they have realized that the problem of race in America jeopardizes American influence in the larger world. And we're seeing that jeopardy of American power and interest and reputation as each one of these incidents continue to compound the previous ones and they attract international attention.
We're short on time, but I want to get to this because is there something, a linchpin, something that would say to you, bam, this is it, this is the change. With that as the basis, there's still that thinking that we thought would age out, that still is here. So what, bringing down the monuments, the Charleston loophole, full access to the body, making the body camera bill perfect. Is there something, or is it everything, all of that has to come together to change the thing? Because that thinking is still going to be there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? Because you got,
I don't think anything is mutually exclusive. In other words, we can do three things at once. I would add two symbols to our education system, to reform of the criminal justice system, including the police, economics. Many of the people you see demonstrating and exercising their First Amendment right to be heard are very well educated, have graduated from high school and most college. They're from broad backgrounds. Watched a demonstration in Marion Square, almost 90% white. And so what we're witnessing are people who feel like they've done what they were supposed to do, but graduated and no job. Or the job is not affording the same quality of life as their parents. And so until we address, particularly in the African American community, because every real index that measures society, we tend to be at the bottom rung. Until there is economic redress and economic equality, there is going to be tension. We
in
can
what
fix,
form, though?
You can start with having governmental contracts reflect the diversity of the county, and I've mentioned that, a couple of examples of that. You can also, we've been fighting for raising the minimum wage. It is a shame that people can work 40 hours a week and still not be able to provide a quality of life for their children. No college savings, no home ownership. These are 40-hour-a-week employees that work for a city or state government. I mean, good jobs, what used to be good jobs, but now don't pay where people can afford a quality of life. So you have to address the full economic structure. And we have the money. What has happened in the last several years is the rich have gotten richer, and the poor have gotten poor. We have two cities in most of the cities across the South Carolina, and they're bordered by rich and poor. You can walk downtown Charleston and pop in a lunch spot, and the prices are very high. Most of the workers that work downtown in our hotels and restaurants don't live downtown because the average cost of a house on the peninsula is average $400,000 or more. And so who are we serving? What America is this? What city is this? We have to have policy that favors the majority of the working class citizens, not just a few. And I'll end by saying this. I was on a panel last night and was really disappointed but can understand the frustration of our young people. But they have all but given up hope on showing up at the polls. And so we can march, we can demonstrate, we can protest, we can exercise our civil disobedience, our First Amendment rights. But until we change the leadership in this state and in this country, none of that is possible. None of the legislative items we've talked about is possible, because it's the elected officials' duty to pass laws to benefit the people. And in the state of South Carolina, we have been dominated by the same party for more than 2 decades. And we continue to fall lower and lower in terms of quality of life in the country. The only way we can change that is if people feel a need to change something, the system in doing that is voting. If you don't vote, you can't make the changes that we're hearing all across the country.
And unfortunately, like I tell a lot of my peers in Columbia, sadly, sometimes change comes through tragedy. And if you understand one thing about South Carolina, you'll understand this. And that's why I'm always optimistic about change, because my history in my life has taught me that change will come, Senator, whether through tragedy or through representation. In this country, history is built on it, and we have to understand that. That's why when I watched the protests in Minnesota, and I saw black people, white people, Jewish people, Italians, I mean, people of all creeds and color, I was moved. I was awestruck. But now it's resonating all over the country and all over the world. And it goes back to that question you asked, what is not connecting? It goes back to what he just said. Well, you gotta have to look at who you have representing you in office, okay? That's why when the SCLC was on the move with the NAACP, with the unions, we're so proud we have the ILA here in Charleston, because they tend to keep things in perspective when it comes to race relations, wages, living wages, livable wages, what we call it, okay? Showing respect and dignity on the job. We should be blessed to have them, okay? But nevertheless, the disconnect is the fact that people won't listen. People in power, they won't listen. They only listen, or you get most of their attention through tragedy, sad to say it. But it's people like us and a lot of other people in this community, they don't want tragedy. And we be ringing the bell, do it this way. One thing I can say about these gentlemen, when they come with problems, they come with solutions. And they taught us that in organizing classes. If you come with a problem, have a solution in hand. You've done the research, you can show the statistics, and you have to have spirit enough to take insults, take threats, okay? Because when you can understand the position of any elected official, or pastor, or anybody who wants to take a stance for righteousness, they are they're going to be scrutinized. They will be under attack.
Sure.
There will be insults, okay? But the true measure of a man, like you once heard, okay? The true measure of a man is what I look at, not where the man stands at times doing comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands during the times of trials and tribulation. That's the true measure.
Onward, Doctor.
Yeah, and I think just as the representative and senator have said, really the key now is getting people who are in the streets to the polling places, getting them there, and ensuring that their votes will be tabulated properly as they cast them, to ensure that measures are not put in place to suppress their vote or to suppress the turnout, because we got to translate the energy from the streets into actual policy. That's what has to happen. And one of the things that I'm so afraid of is that it's the impatience of youth. All of us want change to happen immediately, but we've got enough experience to know that, unfortunately, even the most righteous changes don't happen overnight. We have to work and struggle, and that's the history of this country. People struggling to perfect the Union. This country certainly far from being perfect today, but when we look at the arc of American democracy, it's opened up. It's opened up for people of color. It's opened up for women. We just had a major Supreme Court decision handed down yesterday. LGBTQ people protected in employment. And this is something that grew out of what? The Civil Rights Movement, the '64 Act. So the history of this country and people coming out in the streets, locking arms together, working, and then going to the polls to elect the right leadership has created change. We need much more of it, and you know, because we've got to have it recognized in this state that health care is a civil right. That the absence of appropriate health care and sufficient quality health care for people is destroying their lives. The COVID crisis has demonstrated that, and thrown into bold relief the inequality that continues to exist between people of color and white Americans. And there's no way that we can have a progressive and viable society going forward with this level of inequality. And so we have to move together on a number of fronts to work together to create the kind of quality and character of life that we want, and that the American population and South Carolinians are worthy of.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
We
right.
could talk for probably 2 hours.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Good deal,
We got-
man.